This thing is going down.
Oh, yeah, the West. It might be.
The difference.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Next up, you would want to make just show us. Just make it.
Hold
They don't have a lot of athletic facilities. They got some nice facilities.
Yeah.
It might be.
So it's going okay.
So they're going together.
I'll start.
Unmuted? Yeah. Go ahead. Okay, we ready?
Yeah.
Sure. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call to order this June 5th, 2025 meeting of the Madison Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Present tonight for the commission, we're a little bit low in numbers, but we have a quorum, so we can move forward. John Duza, Bob O'Connor, myself, Carol Snow, Chair, Mike Bugda, and joining us via Zoom is John Morgan. John, can you hear us okay?
I can.
Welcome. Good to have you back.
Thank you. Good to be back.
So we're going to start with a PowerPoint and just do a quick recap of why this is the number 3 housing forum in a series. We've had 2 already. Erin, can you pull up the PowerPoint? Oh, and I'm sorry, this is Erin Mannix, our town planner.
Hello.
And also we
Thanks
have
for coming.
tonight a few people from Senior Services, Youth and Family Services, Affordable Housing. Good to see everybody. And it needs no introduction.
Right.
So as soon as we get the PowerPoint up, we're going to go through some slides. I'll start and then Erin is going to take over. So many of you may have seen the flyer and filled out the questionnaire, but this was our sort of poster child for this session. Can we have the next slide, Erin, and I'll just run through thank you. The agenda for tonight is call to order, welcome and introductions. Check, we've done that. We'll move on to see what the timeline looks like for the zoning regulations updates, zoning and subdivision regulations update, which is why we're doing these forums, by the way, is we're in the process, just beginning pretty much, of updating and revising zoning regulations. Long overdue. I think a lot of them are from some from the 30s. Some from the 60s, when my father was chair of planning and zoning in Madison, by the way. And then just kind of, amendment after amendment after amendment. So it's time to at least clean them up. And now we have reasons to also do updates. I'm going to give a quick recap and summary from our other 2 housing forums for those of you who weren't there, and then goals for tonight's forum, and then turn it over to Erin. So Erin, if I could get the next slide, that'd be great. So this is a collaboration, and we've got a lot of stakeholders involved, a lot of people we've reached out to. Primarily it's planning and zoning, and also economic development, who's not commission, who's not represented tonight, but maybe listening in, I don't know. So it's a combination of town agencies, town boards and commissions. We're also working with the South Central Regional Council of Government. So we have forums working with them too, from all the communities in South Central Connecticut. We've had special housing meetings, and we're learning a lot from each other. Actually, it's really interesting. And then reaching out to the community through any residents, business owners, neighborhood groups, places of worship, civic groups, and the Chamber of Commerce. So we want feedback from everybody. We really appreciate your input, and we want to hear from you. Okay. This is the process, and it's a very rough timeline of how we're going to be revising and updating the zoning and subdivision regulations. So we've already started with discussions and some workshops. So February 20th, April 3rd, the first one was held at the Senior Center downtown. The second one in April was held at Brown Intermediate School. And then we decided tonight we would see how it works just being back in our own fishbowl. And so far, so good. But we also want to have more workshops in the future, especially we're planning a workshop devoted, I think, to HB 5002, the new omnibus bill that passed recently on the state level. Then we're going to hire, we hope to hire this summer a consultant who will be advising us and working with us on the updates. Again, having more public outreach for suggestions on revisions, and then in the winter, reorganization and drafting. That'll be mostly done by the consultant. And then next spring, we'll review what it looks like, what the regulations shape up to be. In the summer, get more feedback, and then idealistically in the fall, go ahead and have regulations that are revised and ready for approval. So that's our goal. And next slide, Erin. So first, a few quick updates and recaps. The first housing forum we had was at the Madison Senior Center. As I said, it was really well attended. We had, I think, a full house with some standing room even. And we curated it with three general questions to kind of have breakout sessions and get people talking among themselves and with each other and then with us, and then summarizing. And so we got a lot of information. I think actually, Erin, there's a handout over on the table that has some of this information of what we've heard and learned.
Yes, for those attending in person, there are a few little fact sheets up at the table. This summary of feedback is there. For those attending remotely, they are linked to the April agenda in our document center, but we are in the process of having that dedicated housing page on the website for planning and zoning, so that the all the fact sheets and PowerPoints and information will be in one location, so you could stay current with our conversations.
And we hope it will be easy to find. I know sometimes it takes a while to navigate our website.
Exactly. Linking things to agendas in the document center is not as user-friendly as we envision to have that in just a dedicated page.
We're used to it, but
for
we
the
don't expect
P&Z.
anybody else to be used to that. So from all that information, though, we did have three main takeaways from the first session. One, we need an increased variety of home types available in Madison. Two, we must protect our natural and historical resources. This is why we love Madison. And then three, there are a lot of open questions. Okay, so at our next forum, which was in April 3rd, we had, again, sort of three questions to structure the meeting. What types of homes do you want to see in Madison? Where do you want to see or not see homes built? And many towns employ different methods to fulfill their housing needs. Which ones would you consider or want to know more about? That's a lot. And actually, as it turned out, it was not as well attended as the first one, but it was attended by folks from Brantford and Guilford who are going through similar processes. So we ended up kind of focusing more on number 3. So we were swapping information about what each town was doing and what we could learn from each other. So I'm just going to read through those bullets that of what some of the options are. Carefully creating zones where the town agrees important housing choices should be developed. Helping developers lower costs by relaxing parking requirements or setback and bulk requirements. Providing streamlined zoning application process. I think that could be vastly improved for Madison's process. Providing tax abatements or helping build infrastructure to support new development. Creating a town administered housing trust fund to help cover some of the development costs. And working with developers to apply for state or federal funding. So those were sort of our takeaways. And we also shared examples of some of the multifamily types that are existing in Madison, some with affordable housing, some without. The Wellington, I think, is the latest example of affordable housing mix. And also I like it because it preserved that historic house. And then, but you can see the types of architecture really do pretty much fit in, and especially when the site is kind of tucked away or screened. I didn't, it takes, I'm still finding some of these developments myself. So it's really good to know that, it's not sort of in your face, ugly stuff, but really quite attractive housing. Okay, next, Erin, then we also summarized what we've approved for multifamily developments recently, which shows 164 units total. And of those, 14 are deed restricted affordable. And I think the next one, sorry, Erin, just keep this for a sec. The next project to be built will be Hammonasset Place. It looks like they're underway. Mill Cottage Road they've cleared, but I haven't seen any construction yet. Erin, do you know?
They,
they're
so
doing?
yes, there are permits for, it's 32 Mill, I believe now, what used to be known as 35 Cottage Road. That is an affordable housing development on the corner of Mill and Cottage, which came into the town as a housing appeals application under the state statutes 8-30G, which essentially it did tie the hands of the town a little bit with respect to zoning bulk standards. This is a process that, because Madison does not have a minimum of 10% of our housing stock as affordable, deed restricted affordable under the state's definition, we are subject to developers coming in and proposing multifamily developments that have a minimum of a 30% set aside of deed restricted units. According to state regulations, they do not have to comply with the underlying zoning regulations in that particular area. And really, the Planning and Zoning Commission is limited to look at health and safety impacts,
Yeah.
really, as potential reasons to deny an application. This particular application went through the Inland Wetlands Agency and the Planning and Zoning Commission, and both approvals from the agencies were appealed to Superior Court, and the town was successful in defending both approvals. And so the developer actually sold the property to another developer who now has begun to construct. They're currently working with utility companies to finalize how utilities will be accessed to the site, but that construction should begin pretty soon. And you're correct, Carol, Hammonasset Place, which is on the north corner of New Road and Duck Hole.
You may have seen it as you came in.
That was a wooded property designated as an opportunity district. And that came in under the planned development district regulations, which was included a zoning map amendment with the Planning and Zoning Commission and subsequent site plan approvals. And they are still not, they're not ready to begin just yet. They're going through health department review, and they have to take care of some lot line revisions and a couple of those items prior to getting building permits. Same with the property up on the top, the Marketplace of Madison. That was probably our most recent approval by the commission. It's a mixed use development sandwiched on the two vacant parcels in between Cohen's Bagels to the east,
And the liquor
in that
store.
area, and the Hammonasset package store to the left.
If you
And
want to live near those opportunities.
these are similar. This project was actually one that was approved, a similar rendition 20 years ago, and those permits had expired, and developer purchased the property and came in, modified the plans to include 12 residential units in each of those buildings on the second and third floors.
With commercial space on the first floor.
Yes, and they are in the process of receiving both state traffic authority and state health department approvals prior to coming back to the Planning and Zoning Commission for 2 minor site plan modifications before they can get going. So that one's a little ways off.
But there's no affordable there, is it?
In that particular development, no,
No
there are
affordable.
no
Yeah.
affordables. And I can say this development on New Road did not have a requirement for an affordable set aside. It was the developer who volunteered to set aside 10% of the units as deed restricted affordable at the 80% rate of our area median income. And those-
Definition of affordable, what are they using for that?
That's a tough question.
That's a very good question. What is affordable housing? So affordable housing is essentially to ensure that residents are not paying more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. And so affordable housing in the state's definition, which we call capital A, affordable housing, is set aside to folks making 80% of the area median income of our particular area or the state's area median income, whichever is less. So in our particular case, Madison is part of the New Haven, Meriden metro area, and therefore our area median income is less than the state's level. So we tend to go, we go with that number. So for a family of four, it's roughly $116,000 a year, I believe. They just changed the numbers in May for the 2025 numbers. So for a family of four to be considered affordable, needing or qualifying for affordable housing, they would need to be making 80% of that 116. And there is a sliding scale. So if you're a family of one, there is a calculation to reduce that based on the family size. And that's all prescribed by the state.
Do you all want to add anything to that from the Affordable Housing Commission?
That's basically.
Yeah.
Sometimes it could be 60%.
So in the case, correct, thank you, Francine. In the case of an affordable housing development that comes in under the housing appeals process, this section 8-30G of our statutes, there's a requirement, as I said earlier, a 30% set aside. So 30% of the total number of units need to be set aside as deed restricted affordable. That's for a minimum of 40 years. And of that 30%, 15% needs to be at the 80% and 15% at the 60% area median income. So there's two varieties there. You can, there are housing developments such as the Wellington that came in, that was a nonprofit development on Cottage Road, the one that Carol mentioned with the preserved historic salt box. That particular development has deeply affordable units. Some residents renting there are of the 25% area median income, 50 and 60, I believe, Molly, is that's correct? And so there's different needs in the community. So this Hammonasset was the minimum of the 80%. For our housing that is deed restricted, affordable, for the town to be able to get that credit towards our 10% minimum, it does need to meet the state's definition of affordable. So it in the particular case of if it's less of a, we'll meet affordable for a certain amount of time, and then those units will disappear, essentially.
I also want to
from
add that there's an affordable housing plan that you can review so that you don't have to absorb all this at once. And it's available on our town website through the commission.
We have a website, the Affordable Housing Committee has a website also. You can find it there. And there's some questions there. And some FAQs.
Yes, the Affordable Housing Committee has a great FAQ site, and your website is very nice, easy, your webpage to navigate.
Does it answer how you can qualify? I mean, do you get precedence if you work in Madison or if you're a senior in Madison? How do we ensure, I guess, that we are satisfying the worker piece and the senior piece?
Very good question.
Yeah.
So the commission is looking at housing in general, as Carol said. Generally speaking, the reason that the zoning regulations are being updated at this time is because the commission just finished a comprehensive review and update of our plan of the town's plan of conservation and development. That's essentially the master plan of our community. So all regulations, some spending, purchasing of land, things of that nature that the town does needs to be found consistent with this master plan.
Which is also available online.
Throughout that process, there was a lot of public engagement with various members of the community, other agencies that have a stake as its conservation and development, right? So one of the findings and goals that came out of that plan of conservation and development was that there was generally a need to be able to provide housing that meets the needs of our residents throughout all the stages of their lives, regardless of where they may be in their life. And so that's a policy issue that the Planning and Zoning Commission needs to tackle as part of this comprehensive zoning code update. So we have this master plan that has all these wonderful goals and how we envision our community in 10 years. But now we have to review the regulations and make sure that there's nothing in the regulations that's going to prevent us from getting there, or that we need to add things that can help get us to that point. And so, as Carol indicated earlier, also, the regulations have not been updated in quite some time comprehensively. There have been multiple updates, but they tend to be piecemealed. And so you may be reviewing regulations regarding setbacks and you read one section and then 30 pages later, there's going to be an I gotcha that you didn't know was there because these were haphazard sort of over the years, and that happens.
And some of the properties are still even defined by the owners around them, not an address. I mean.
Yeah, there's quite a bit. There's legal
There's some
updates,
updating we need to do.
just making the document more user friendly. So the goal of the update is not to rewrite the entire regulations. A lot of the same information that's in the regulations will be restructured and reformatted so it's easier to find, and it makes sense when you open the book as you're progressing through a project or information that you're looking for. There are going to be policy items that we have to discuss. Housing is the biggest one, likely, not just from pressures from the state level, but also needs that we're hearing from residents. Others will be things like resiliency,
Climate change.
so there's a few different policy pieces that the commission will have to tackle, and likely individually. So we thought this would be a great idea to have this forum series ahead of getting a consultant on board so that we can get a sense of people's personal experiences. And that was something that was very helpful in our first meeting, these roundtable discussions. And everyone spoke from their personal experiences with housing. Folks that either your family, your housing experiences in town, do you, are you stuck in your home and can't downsize? Do you have relatives that you'd like to have close to home that can't be caretakers, things of that nature? Who is connected to our community, who is struggling with housing choices now?
Including the workforce.
And that is something that we looked at and took away from the February meeting is what about the folks who are employed in town, the town's employees, our teachers, our first responders, our employees here at town campus, what are their salaries and where do they live? So I started gathering a lot of that information, and those facts are going to be on our housing page as well. Our current regulations talk about housing priorities for residents, and it had basically a ranking order in them, just as you suggested. How do you ensure specific housing for folks here that need it? Some of that's a legal question that the commission's going to have to explore and run through our attorney. We can't create regulations that are exclusionary. So that's a valid question, and it's on our list to, as we get into that, find out if there is an opportunity that you can have specific housing. And some of that could be structured not necessarily from a town's end, but a developer's perspective, saying, just as we had a developer say, I'm going to set aside 10% of my housing as affordable because I want to, he may say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and reach out to town employees and say, I'm going to put 25 of my units dedicated first, in our process of renting them to folks. So,
But you have to make sure it doesn't break any state laws.
Exactly.
right, exactly. And that may not be from the town's perspective, but that may be the desire of a developer to do that. But yes, that question has come up, and clearly before, because the commission wrote it, not this particular
Not this
folks
commission.
sitting here, but the Planning and Zoning Commission wrote that into their requirements in their housing
And
regulations
we
currently.
want the regulations to be inclusionary as much as possible.
Right.
Even if it's,
And I think, when we look at housing a little more holistically, depending on, we look at transportation, we look at resources for folks, and, it's challenging to live in our community without a car, to have transportation. And so you're looking at folks who would likely have vehicles. Where are these developments located? Some of that draws who would live there as well.
we'll talk about it more. But I think we answered your question.
Yeah.
And then some.
Yeah, so not all of these are affordable housing developments, but these are housing developments recently, at least over the last 10 years, that
Multifamily,
have been approved and not yet constructed.
Sarah. Okay, so how do we get there? Connecticut communities are using many options to solve their housing needs, and we're trying to make changes to historically restrictive zoning through different pathways that will work for Madison. So, Erin, I'm going to turn this PowerPoint over to you at this point, I think, because what we did then was to create a brief questionnaire to get a lot more feedback, more specifically focused on zoning options and regulations.
Yes, before I begin, you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to catch you just before you moved on, if possible. Because I understand, we're heading in a direction for new establishments, new areas in town, new types of housing, whether it be guided by the state or our own volition, it's fine. Are we talking about something, particularly when it comes to rentals? It's easy enough to start these things up, to build them and whatnot. But is there any discussion, or has there been any, as far as maintaining some oversight as to the rental? And would that go through a certain department, or are you thinking about a new department, a new person, just adjunct to something, as far as checking on the rental structure to meet the state guidelines after they're built and down the road on an ongoing basis?
You're speaking specifically about affordable, deed
Yes,
restricted
in the
affordable?
affordable area.
Yes.
Sales, I'm not worried about, because that's deed restricted. But rentals, I'd be more concerned about.
So both are monitored to an extent by the town. All of the developments are permitted through the Planning and Zoning Commission. So as a requirement, there is, at the time, prior to approving an application, an affordability plan is prepared.
Mhm.
And it essentially prescribes which units are deed restricted. There's a requirement that all of these units receive the same amenities as the market rate units in a mixed unit development. And there is a process that myself and Heather Noblin, our Assistant Director of Senior Services, and even Molly Fahey, our Social Services Coordinator at Youth and Family, participate in. We review all units that are deed restricted for sale. So prior to listing a deed restricted unit, an application is made to my office. We review maximum sales price under the state's guidelines, and allow then certify that, allow the property owner to list the property. And then when a buyer is chosen, we do guide the seller as far as what maximum incomes can be for that particular unit. It's based off of family size, number of bedrooms. We verify then again, prior to a purchase, the buyer's income and eligibility, and we file documentation on the land records certifying that the buyer is eligible to purchase that unit. The rentals are a little bit different. Some of the more recent developments have management companies. Some of our older owner-occupied units that were built in the 90s do not have management companies or even current HOAs who could manage the process of vetting out the sales and maintaining. We want to maintain and oversee these so we don't lose any of these affordable units. We have such a small number. We want to have eyes on all of them to ensure that they stay.
How are you going to develop the eyes?
So we do have a process currently. It's sometimes cumbersome and sometimes not all that enjoyable. But we do. And management companies annually are supposed to report back to my office on behalf of the commission, certifying the residents in the units, the last date of sale, basically assuring us that nothing has changed on the land records. And the rentals are a little bit different. So in a for sale unit that is deed restricted, that's a one-time vetting of a buyer. On a rental, it's an annual application with the company. So there's an opportunity there if somebody has the need for affordable housing, but then their situation improves or their income increases and they're no longer eligible for that unit, they may offer them a market rate unit in that development or one that's tiered higher for them, and that offers opportunity for growth for someone else to come in at that level.
Who the they be?
The management company?
So you're saying the management companies, the town would hold responsible? Or, because to my knowledge, as a property manager, the state does not have any regulation yet on property managers to, unless the unless the board of directors for that unit or those units charges them with that.
Right, this
So
is
this
not
would
at
be
the
a
state
town-
level.
Would this be a town oversight?
This is a local oversight.
Okay.
And you have to
That's a lot of work.
understand, we do not have many deed restricted rentals in this.
Right,
The
not yet.
Wellington is
Not yet.
correct. And so there may be a need to change that structure as, if numbers increase. But currently it is handled by staff.
I just brought it up because it is a lot of work for you folks, whatever department it goes through.
It's Aaron's
And
department.
It's yours, and Heather and others. So I just bring it up because I would assume that meeting the percentages to get funding and whatnot for different building is going to increase rental units over time. Yeah.
And it may require then having a rental.
And so it's going to be
commission.
more calls coming in as there's annual turnovers or
Right, yeah.
whatever. So
And that's something that the Affordable Housing Committee has discussed as well.
yeah.
Kind of projecting.
I just hadn't heard where, that might be landing as far as, follow-up after developments are up and going and it becomes a daily work
Right.
kind of situation. I think Heather's got enough going on over there now.
And it really depends on the unit. So in our particular case, the Planning and Zoning Commission does not regulate a difference between a rental and a for sale unit. An affordability plan can come forward showing either option. So we may not know. For example, the 18 units on the corner of Mill and Cottage, they could potentially be owner occupied as opposed to, as a, with an HOA as opposed to rentals and a management company.
Okay, so. to be
18 units is
affordable housing,
18
they don't have
units.
to have a percentage of rentals. They can have.
No, it does not
They can
distinguish
just keep
between
the
rentals or
60%
ownership.
rule or
It's the units, they're set aside, and
Sure. So that's an elective thing, that's not a,
it's the choice of the developer.
gotcha.
Could that be written in a regulation?
And we
I
do,
don't know, that's something we can explore.
we do have regulations for short-term rentals.
No, we don't.
I mean, sorry. Now that I've gotten into- What I was trying to, actually, I was trying to segue into the bed and breakfast issues and Airbnbs and accessory dwelling units as rental units. And, you know, a lot of residents have had problems with enforcing some of the short-term rentals, I would say.
You do have the ability to regulate terms for, with your accessory apartment regulations. As you revisit those in your zoning code update, you could look at, that was one of our questions actually in the brief questionnaire that went out on this flyer, was to kind of start to take the pulse from residents, how they feel about accessory apartments. The state, and we'll talk about some legislative changes coming up, but the state had, I guess the last significant housing bill was in 2021. And in that particular bill, there were accessory apartment regulations that were passed. And they were much more lenient than what the town currently has for accessory apartments. But I would note that Madison has had fairly lenient accessory apartment regulations since the 90s,
Yeah.
89, I think.
Ahead of the game.
And which is ahead of many municipalities in our area. So I think that's a good thing. But there was an option when this statute came out in 21, giving municipalities the option of opting out. So you had a certain time frame to have the Planning and Zoning Commission and the legislative body of the municipality decide whether or not they wanted to opt in to the state statutes or opt out and be able to maintain your own regulations. Madison is one of the communities that decided to opt out because they wanted to maintain some local control over the regulation and not be subject to future legislative changes within that accessory apartment language, and to be able to cater the regs specifically to the needs of our community. That being said, perhaps there, and I've seen this in other communities, you could restrict that accessory dwellings are not rented for less than 3 months, 6 months, something like that. There is possibility to regulate
What about the
in that
primary-
sense.
Primary dwellings though, that are all being rented out.
Well, so that's a larger conversation,
Another
and the
issue,
town
yeah.
has had some conversations on this a couple years ago. Really, there was quite a bit of discussion on the Board of Selectmen side about short-term rentals. There was a sense at the time not to be too heavy-handed, looking to over-regulate something that we didn't really have a grasp on the impact of short-term rentals at the time. And I can tell you, typically, my office receives complaints, zoning use, land use related complaints. We have not received any housing complaints regarding short-term rentals in quite some time since that discussion. But that's absolutely something that could, be brought up. There's always a conversation of whether or not it's better to regulate within a zoning code versus an ordinance. And that conversation was had as well. And maybe as part of this update, we end up bringing some of that back out to kind of rehash that and determine whether or not there is a place in the zoning code for it.
I thought that the purpose on the affordable housing side was not only from a purchase point of view to keep people in town or to help local people, but also from a rental point of view. So somebody, they couldn't afford to buy, so they didn't have the down payment, but they could at least start on the rental level and then have a chance to stay that way, or seniors that were downsizing, that kind of thing. So I didn't know, I haven't read anything as far as whether we're thinking about that as being a possibility for these developers in getting tax credits or anything else if they provide so many rentals. That would be affordable housing, qualify for affordable housing, or whether we're pretty much trying to stay away from that and make it only saleable units.
So tax credits and incentivizing affordable housing is not necessarily a conversation that the Planning and Zoning Commission is having at this stage. That's more of a conversation that should be had with the Affordable Housing Committee, of ways to help increase the number of affordable units. That's incentive, tax incentives or abatements would go through the Board of Selectmen and wouldn't necessarily be under the purview of the Planning and Zoning
I'm
Commission.
just bringing it up because I thought, and if things are gonna, developments or developers are gonna come with these thoughts and obviously ask planning and zoning
Right.
to.
We actually
watch
hope that one of
something
our
out.
future workshops or forums is with developers. And invite a group of developers to come who have experience with different types of these housing projects and hear from them.
So you're probably gonna get involved whether you like it or not.
Well, so
Well, we need
that's
to,
sort
we
of
need to know, I think.
that puzzle slide that came in. The Planning and Zoning Commission is one piece of the puzzle to solve and the housing needs of our community. And all of these, now we have to look at all of the different players here who can help implement, change is hard. And as we're going to hear, there's change taking place on the state level, and whether we like it or not. And so the town needs to change to keep some things the way you like it. So we have to adapt and find ways to preserve land, find ways to strategically meet the needs that the commission and the town are hearing from residents here and those connected to our town. So these are hard conversations, I think, that we're having, and all feedback I think is good feedback. And some of that, I think it was great that we had some sharing on social media as well about our questionnaire. And by no means was a questionnaire meant to be a survey of
Or scientific
decisions.
survey. It's
So really, right. So this questionnaire is to, reach folks who are interested in housing in our community, and to help kind of guide our conversation this evening and also future conversations. So we know.
Francine,
If I just say something that might help, just add a little bit to your question.
If you could just speak up, Francine, so everybody on.
Oh, sorry.
we don't have a mic tonight, so.
Okay, just maybe, this helps to answer your question or not, but, the Affordable Housing Committee, that myself and Anthony, we have met with, over the last 2 years that we've been meeting, we have met with quite a few developers that have done completely rental affordable housing. Whether in different towns in Connecticut, Massachusetts, but quite a few in Connecticut. We've seen some very, very nice, renderings of some, I think anybody would be pleased to see some of the stuff that we've seen.
Sure, great.
And so it definitely is very much a topic for our committee, the notion of having affordable housing rental, all rental, community. And that's something that we hope to continue to be able to discuss, learn more about, be able to present to people when it's time. But yes.
I'd love to talk to you about it anytime. I
Okay.
was just figuring, as long as we're starting to think about rewriting the planning and zoning regulations, that hopefully at some point it's going to come in. So the P and Z board has guidelines in the future. And that was a different question than obviously the one about, maintaining the oversight on the rentals.
The places that we've
From a
heard about
management point of
have
view.
all have had management companies, whether or not they were built by nonprofits or they continue to be run by the nonprofit, or they were developers, they all had people that took care of those. It was not that the town was.
No,
It's not turned over to the town.
I agree with that. I just, being a property manager, I find that if a town is charged with something by the state as far as meeting certain guidelines. It's nice, that there's more of some kind of town oversight, where a property management company is responsible. So I just find there are property management companies and there are property management companies, so that's my comment.
Thanks.
Sorry to take the time.
This is actually, I mean, I hope you don't mind that we're sort of abandoning our agenda and just letting people
Yeah,
talk.
I'm sorry about that.
I think it's good to get the feedback.
I'm curious about the extent of the outreach. I know that a lot came from the first meeting and maybe some from the second, and this being the third. And then there's social media, which some people are on and some people are not, when they have access to the QR code or the link to that so-called survey. But was there any outreach through other avenues, such as was there a posting in the Source newspaper? Was there an effort on the part of the senior center to talk directly to seniors who may not be on social media, who may not be coming to meetings because they're either unable to, or it's the wrong time of the day, they don't have a ride,
Yeah.
any of that? So is the information you're using and, you know, in planning to use in changing regulations strictly based on 3 meetings that a few people came to, when we're talking about how many thousands of people who live in this town?
Yeah, and we're not making any decisions at this point either, but if you have recommendations for how we can do a better job at reaching out to people, and we did talk a little bit about the QR code and, you know, how do you help people who don't use that kind of technology routinely?
I'm
And we can
65.
have other
I've
ways
got
of,
5 siblings that are older than me that would not know how to use a QR code.
yeah.
And, you know, we've got people much older than that. And, you know,
And we want to hear from them.
and I've spoken with a lot of them with regards to other issues in town, and they're completely unaware. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering,
Well, we
What
get that
effort
kind of
is being
feedback all the
made?
time that, you know, nobody told us, or, you know, how did we know? And, you know, we want this to be as transparent and open as possible. So if you have ideas for us of how we can do a better
That's a good
job
point.
reaching out,
Yeah.
let us
Well,
know.
yeah, the other thing is, we know that we're just starting as a town facilities study.
Yeah,
And that's a big player in terms of what
definitely,
kind of properties can you use within the town
exactly.
for whatever goals we have here that we're
Mhm.
trying to realize.
And they're doing a great job, I think, of, you know, gathering all the information. I've seen the preliminary presentation, which was excellent. And so, yeah, we're working with them as well to see what the options are.
So, yes, these beginning conversations are not the sole source of information. I mean, that would be inappropriate, I think, to base decisions on that. Some of this is inviting folks to be involved and whether they continue to be involved or so the newspaper, absolutely newspaper articles, and we have a good working relationship with Aaron at the Source, who has been to our housing meetings and followed up on those. What's nice about having the connections with the senior center, Heather is part of the newsletter and sharing information with those who are members of the senior center. Townwide, a lot of information is shared on the website. So as we begin and we'll be engaging with a consultant, I think that's helpful to hear. We've done in other plan writing processes, in-person public outreach events at the library. We've had some conversations before at the senior center, some sponsored with residents.
You may see some of us at the farmer's market.
But, maybe there's a need to sit outside Stop and Shop
Yeah.
as
with
part
the
of the
table.
process.
Where
When
the people are.
I was part of the zoning code update in my previous position with the town of Guilford. And so from the beginning phases of that zoning code update, there was a public outreach. It was on cable access, an announcement for that on the website. And there are, the way that was structured, I don't know that our commission will necessarily choose the same process, but they were public sessions where you could come and speak directly to the a consultant on, maybe you felt like you were burned by the zoning regulations somehow when you tried to pull a permit on your house and it really irritated you. It has nothing to do with housing, but maybe it's something else. And you wouldn't necessarily be comfortable saying that in front of staff or the commission. And these were opportunities where a consultant just sat and listened and talked and took notes and provided all that information back to staff and the commission of things that we should look at. So these are some ideas, what we set out, but this will not be the only time that they're floated throughout town. And if we need to do a series, maybe a series in the newspaper is appropriate as we go through this. I'm open for, other suggestions that are not web-based necessarily.
So the thing is, a lot of these things are in conflict with each other, right? So people want to maintain the character of the town, maintain open space, keep our trees, don't do the
change
clear
anything.
cutting. And they're also saying we need more housing, more affordable housing. So you guys, like, how do you then determine the priority? Because you can't have everything. And when you do all these surveys and you do all these outreach, great, it's great to hear from people, but you're gonna hear a million different things. Right, so somebody's gotta like make the decision and prioritize and say, our priority is maintaining the character of town, right? So we don't wanna like put buildings all in downtown and, we may have to do some of that now with this new terrible state law that is getting signed presumably. So that's the elephant in the room. Like your hands are going to be tied with a lot of this stuff that you're even asking people for input on.
Some, not all. And the policies and what people want was established in the Plan of Conservation and Development. And so the drafting of the regulations now need to be consistent with that plan. So that was made clear at the time of the drafting of the master plan, the need for conservation, preservation of historic structures, things like that, all those qualities that make Madison special that the town wants to preserve. So it's not an easy job the commission has
It took a
to
while.
structure that.
Well, even, in the Plan of Conservation and Development, you might think there's conflict even in that document too, because, on one hand, we might say, save all the historic houses, but, we want transit-oriented development near the train station or something. It's gonna take some back and forth.
There are changes that are directly impacting the town in the new state laws. Some of them are shalls and some of them are opportunities for the town should they choose to go in that direction. They are not all mandated. So I'll touch briefly on that. The bill itself is over 90 pages. There, we have Office of Legislative Research doing some summaries. We're talking, I was just at a regional meeting yesterday for our Council of Governments. Everyone's trying to digest what all of this means.
What
Some
just
of this
happened.
is the state's Office of Policy and Management needs to set criteria by certain dates. And so as we start unfolding some of this information, we're going to have additional meetings just focused on the bill itself. So tonight we're going to introduce it. Ironically, the commission chose this night for their meeting back in April, just thought, we'll give it, another month or so and we'll meet. And it just so happens to tie in to HB 5002, which is, as timing could say, it's alarming, but a lot of that hasn't been really broken out to see what the specific Madison impact is yet. So we can't speak to that. I'm not going to give you wrong information. I've been reading it. I've been speaking with colleagues. We're not going to act in a bubble by any means. Our
even
town
at the
attorney will be involved.
At the regional level, yesterday we had a session, and there were a lot of I don't knows.
Absolutely.
That was the answer. to many of
All
our
towns are in the
questions.
same
And
situation right now.
And so I think that, we'll have time, there's plenty of time to figure it all out and incorporate what we need to.
It's this era when you're talking about this bill, Is it the one size fits all again?
No, it's
No,
not.
it's not.
No,
Okay.
it's not a one size fits all.
No.
This is a fair share component
Okay.
in this particular
I didn't look at it
bill.
yet.
I saw 47% for Madison for an increase.
I'm not gonna speak to the specifics because I don't want to give you
Yeah.
misinformation.
We haven't figured out
That's
the
not a
exact
number
numbers. Yeah.
I
Let me
heard.
throw out something quickly that, you know, one thing, I can't speak for my fellow board members, especially the ones who aren't here, but I suspect that none of us has to live here. You know, we could go somewhere else. And the reason I'm mentioning that is our goal is not to, let's destroy Madison because this is such a bad place to live that it needs to be fixed by totally changing everything and making, come on, you know, that's not our mentality. Unfortunately, priorities doesn't mean you're either 100% we do everything to maximize on that, or we just totally ignore it and don't care. You know, there's gradations. So it's fortunately, you know, I hope one of the reasons to get input from people quite rightly have different experiences and different things they're concerned about and different things they want to see. That's great. So I think nobody was going to come out is going to be 100% satisfied. But hopefully, no one's going to think, guys, these guys were paid off, or they've totally destroyed the town, or there's somebody.
We get accused of a
You
lot
know,
of things.
there's a lot of things. So, you know, speak to us, let us know, and hopefully we're smart enough and we listen to people and get good consultants, and we'll come up with something that's going to make not only be tolerable, but actually lead to a better Madison that's going to preserve the stuff we really care about and also improve the town.
I have here several pages on the POCD, the planning and I'm a member of the Conservation Commission, very new as of January. So, policy B, not just A, it goes all the way down to F or G, but policy B is to enhance connections to nature in Madison and position the town's natural resources as an attraction. You know, and I'm sure you've heard that. Yeah. and-
We wrote it. But I mean, you know,
When we were talking about players and who are involved in this process, we mentioned inland wetlands and resiliency, and there was no mention of Conservation Commission. Now, I know a member of the commission who's been with the commission for 18 years, and she said not one member of PNC or Board of Selectmen has come to the commission for advice or consulting.
well, they.
The Conservation Commission was part of the plan of
Yeah, they
conservation and
contributed-
development
yes,
process.
Right.
So
Yeah, because
that is seeking advice.
Right. Well, and then I want to make sure we do that.
Yeah.
Because item 3 on that, policy B is develop an open space plan. You don't want to do that after the fact, after you've, cut out all these sections for development to then come out with an open space plan. That has to be part of the whole.
The holistic
mixture.
approach.
Right, and I hope that you use, I know there are so many committees and commissions, and government can be cumbersome. You're just listening to you, Erin. I don't know how you maintain all that. It's just beyond me, and I've worked with government for many years on the federal level, but I just hope that
Well, thank you, and thank you for serving on the Conservation Commission.
yeah, I'm just getting started, but I really, it broke my heart to see what happened on New Road.
We've heard about it,
Oh, yeah.
and I mean, it's hard for us to see too in
Well,
some
there were
cases.
trees there that are over 200 years old.
Yep.
I took pictures of them. I got them. I got all the rings on them. There was one that was 4 different trees together, joined together. It was on the far end of that property, right up against that house, the beautiful home. And they took that down. And they didn't need to, because it's right on the edge of it.
We might need to save this conversation for another.
No, I know, but, now why did they do that in the spring? And does planning and zoning have any say in that? Why in the spring, where you're killing the birds, you're killing the babies of every single species that was in that tract of forest for God knows how long.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
It
There's
is
no
heartbreaking.
reason. Now we got backup on how long it's going to take for this developer to even start. Why? Why did they clear cut in spring?
So Terry, I think there is not a requirement as far as times of year for construction. Some of this is conversation for other aspects of the update, not specifically this evening's agenda, but when there is collaboration with the state for natural diversity database, and referrals when there are noted species in an area, referrals to the state, and oftentimes there are limits on construction seasons to do specific work. In this particular property, it was not within a natural diversity, so there was not that trigger. There is not currently a mechanism in the
But
regulations.
you're in the process of rewriting. the
Yes.
And we're thinking
And,
about it.
and the commission should play a role, and the Conservation Commission should play a role in an open space plan and a natural resources inventory. All those things would be helpful in
The whole
seeing
process.
where development should be focused, having that inventory. So those are great tasks for the commission to begin to assist in this process.
And
Agreed.
We're more than willing to. In fact, we're noted as the lead entity.
Yes, you are.
I was just gonna say that.
With partner entity being Facilities Committee, Planning and Zoning Commission, and Town Staff. So we're all in this together.
Right,
Of course.
So
Right.
we're happy to be included.
Good, great, thank you.
and I may not have put conservation on that puzzle piece, but I jammed as much as I could on that piece, and I knew that if I started to list commissions, there would be some groups
Somebody
that
would be
weren't
left
mentioned
out.
that would get irritated that I didn't put you on. So it was a
No,
6 to 1, half a
no
dozen to
worries.
the other.
Erin, before we go
Um,
on, I just want to say that, I hope
That's
you're
fine.
okay.
Yeah.
That there's a question.
I know it's hard with I can stop sharing so
Or should
that
we
we
wait
can
and
allow folks attending to speak. Or we can give Eileen a chance now.
Yeah, if we could give Eileen a chance.
Eileen, can you hear us?
Looks like you might be muted.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Okay. So I've been sitting in on these meetings since about 2017, 2018. I was actually there at the planning and zoning meeting when the new road development was approved. And my first question is, what is the bottom line gain for this town of Madison to become what I would call the poster child of affordable housing in the state of Connecticut? I come from a town where there's a lot of development for rental housing, which is in Hamden, Connecticut. We have a whole, we have so much housing for rental income, and I just don't see the benefit to the town overall. So is it to build the grand list? Is that what it is? Because unfortunately, where I am in Madison is in an area where a lot of people are disenfranchised as far as voting rights because I'm in the Cottage area. I am on Cottage Road. We have fought both of those developments that many of the developments that have gone through. But as we know, or as everyone should know, very few people can vote in that area. So there's not that much opposition. So now we have, as you just showed on your slide of all the developments, I think 4 of them are in that area. So there could have been a number of things that could have been done to that area to promote recreation and development with Hammonasset, the way it was maybe 30 years ago even. But housing developers have taken it over. Now we have these affordable housing requirements that we have to fulfill for towns to the state, and it sounds like those are increasing. So I'm just curious why Madison, what is the gain to Madison for increasing affordable housing? The plan of conservation and development prior to the one that was just updated still had in it that the seniors wanted more senior housing. They wanted to stay in Madison. So that still sounds like that's in play, but it just doesn't sound like that is a priority for any of these developers, other than for them to be seeking profits. So if you could tell me that, Aaron, I mean, Madison is quickly going to become Madison, Branford, Guilford, et cetera, just the way it's growing. And it would be nice to make Madison the town that everyone loves to be in, including myself.
I'm not sure how to answer your question, Eileen. I think really the point, the commission does not have an agenda other than to create regulations that match the desires of the town, which was emphasized in our planning process with our master plan.
And as we're mandated by the state.
I think,
but there was probably no, excuse me, just to interject, there was probably no master plan to overdevelop Cottage Road area. And in addition to that, you have about 600 seasonal residents who do pay taxes to the town of Madison, but they don't have voting rights because they don't change their voting from whatever town they reside in elsewhere down to Madison. So there's about 600 to 1,000 families that have been enjoying that recreational area for decades, and they've had no rights in what is going on in that area. So now I understand that it's going to get a little bit more real because there's not much more you can do in that area, really. So now it's going to start spreading across town, and now it's going to be in your backyard versus the backyard that it's been overdeveloped in. But I just want to know, is it building the grand list for the town of Madison that you're so on board to continuing to be the poster child of affordable housing in the state of Connecticut?
I'm not sure who your questions are directed to, Eileen. And I don't know the relevance of.
They're not directed to anyone personally. It's just a global thing. So please don't take it personally. At times it's felt very personal. So they're global questions out to anyone who could answer it, or maybe I have to ask Peggy, what is the bottom line? Is it growing the grand list? And isn't that the tax base? And how are you going to get the tax base from rentals and affordable housing? The developers are really, I just hear now that we have local rulings versus we opted out of a state program. So maybe we've become more of a target in that regard. It just seems that it's out of balance.
So, I think that voting as a taxpayer has nothing to do with updating the zoning code itself. That's a process that is a public hearing process. It's a vote by the Planning and Zoning Commission with that. Whether you're a seasonal resident or a year-round resident can be kept informed and involved through the process. I think if you read through the Plan of Conservation and Development, you'll see that there is a need for a balance of economic growth and conservation and meeting the needs sustainable in a sustainable way for our folks. It's a heavy lift, I think, that the commission has
And for
other
everyone who wants
agencies.
to live here or who is connected to Madison.
So the commission, as Carol and others have said, there is no agenda currently in these housing forums. It's simply to share what information we've heard so far, beginning our outreach, and to continue to listen so that when we start drafting regulations, that they're drafted where folks will support them.
And everyone who pays taxes can vote on the budgets, right? They can vote on the budgets. They can't vote for elected officials, but they can vote on the budgets.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. So that's good to know. Yeah, I mean, you do have quite a population that comes in every summer. And I know that over the years, it's been frowned upon in some ways. However, you have some good citizens, 600 of plus on both ends of Madison that are here seasonally. And the Cottage Road area has just gotten inundated with affordable housing coming into the area. And you were talking about somebody was talking about the wildlife and all of those concerns. So, I mean, I love Madison and I would love to see it conserved and not built up to just be an affordable housing mecca that the developers enjoy. And it looks like there's a lot of people from your survey from questions 1 and 2 that, have concerns as well. So I'm glad that you're doing this process. I caught it on Facebook and logged into it tonight. So I can't really see the room. I can only see it on the pop-out screen, which is fine, but I'm glad you're doing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen.
On that note, maybe we can jump back
Yeah,
into
I don't want to keep too long. We did
the
say
results
we
of the
would
survey, and
we
then-
would keep everybody to 8:30.
we do want to
and
give
to
a quick overview of the bill as well.
allow some folks. So yes, so after feedback over the last couple of weeks and folks on social media sharing the questionnaire, we have roughly 200 answers. Is that enough for our town? No, but actually it's pretty decent feedback for a couple of weeks. It's better than I've seen in some actual surveys. However, it's just a starting point. One positive takeaway that I think is this first question, asking people, are you interested with the commission hosting workshops to answer specific questions or topics about housing related subject matter? And we do have a decent amount of support for that. Some examples of those types of panels could be, hey, a panel on the new housing bill. That would be great. Having folks who voted for it, folks who are land use attorneys, how that impacts our community directly. That would be great for not just this commission, but for other policymakers and residents in town. I've already started putting that session together. So I hope to have that be scheduled for the next few weeks. And another one is septic. That's come out even on a regional level with others in our COG. We are a small community that is predominantly private wells and entirely individual private septic systems. There is no sewer system in town and we have limited water. So let's have some discussions on what that means for development. What's even capable, what can we even do in town? What is the capacity for Connecticut water? What does septic look like? We all know what septic looks like. I don't mean it like that.
Or is there new technology that we should be?
Right. What are the
exploring?
regulations for lot requirements? What's a local approval? What's a state Department of Public Health approval? What's a DEEP treatment plant look like? And what's involved in that? And that will start looking at areas in town that are even viable for any development. We have a lot of wetlands. We have a lot of ledge. We have beautiful sand. It depends where you are in town.
I was just gonna say, is that that could be a real deterrent to you being able to comply with the state.
And we're also
Absolutely.
we're also talking now about what land is even developable,
Right.
as opposed to buildable, but shifting gears, so it takes all these factors into consideration, which is what we have to do.
Right, the open space. We learned during which isn't too different from the last plan of conservation and development, almost half of our community is open space. That's amazing. That's very,
And that's why we live here.
Right.
That's why we
right.
wanna live
That's why I live here. we all have a vested interest in our community, which is why we're not drafting regulations behind the scenes and putting them out and having you sit here for a public hearing. This is why we're having conversations now, so that we can, when a regulation is finally drafted, all of you can be in the audience in support of this, that you were all part of this and helped own it from the beginning. That's what planning should be. So some of these questions, actually, the remaining 7 questions all have concerns. That was specific to be able to have opportunities to get what some of these concerns are in the future, not just a yes or a no. We may not really even know that we don't have enough information to make a decision. The accessory apartment one, it stems from the state statutes changing a few years ago, more than a few now, and also from just experience here in our land use office, people coming in wanting to build apartments. My kid can't buy a house in town. I want to be able to put an apartment on that they could live in. Oh, actually, my kids who have a family now want to live in my house, and all I need is an apartment. What can I get? I only have 800 square feet. That some of that is a deterrent for folks. Also, sometimes there's concern. Maybe increasing the square footage of an apartment isn't necessarily a game changer, but reducing setbacks is terrible and no one likes that. We need to flush this out during our process. Maybe we don't even know what an accessory apartment is, and we need to have a session that just explains them, what they look like. I'm happy to show you. I just built one in my backyard for my mom.
And they're new builders with, the tiny houses and different options.
There's all sorts of options. Again, some of that is dependent on septic. Some of that could be an opportunity to deed restrict them. Would people want to deed restrict their accessory apartment to make it count towards our affordable requirement with the state? These are all kind of ideas that we can toss around. Not every one of these is going to be the answer. And maybe we don't get buy-in for some of them. This create opportunities for carefully designed housing developments in focused areas of town. There are some concerns. About half the respondents have concerns about that. And you should. I mean, your housing choice, buying your house is one of the largest investments you've ever made. You have the right to be concerned about things, but we need to be able to run through these. Maybe there is a town-owned piece or another privately owned piece that has enough area and they're willing to kind of focus a development right there while preserving the underlying rural residential zone. Maybe that's a great opportunity, but we don't have a zoning tool currently that would allow that. So this looks at specific tools that the Planning and Zoning Commission can do without making a blanket change to the entire zoning district. One question that just came up, really kind of inspired from some other towns and what they're considering. Some towns, we're not as bad, actually. Some towns have a minimum zoning requirement of 4 acres in their rural areas. Next door in Guilford, they did. But here in Madison, we have not quite 1 acre. We have 1.5 acre zoning and just under 2 acre zoning for our rural zones.
Like tens of thousands of
Which
feet
is-
instead of acres, square footage.
It's challenging. So it's not quite 2 acres or not quite 1.
I got 1.93 acres.
And so really kind of the question is, are people willing to look at maybe there's an opportunity to reduce some of the lot size requirements in our rural areas, to not focus everything necessarily in south of Route 1. Maybe folks south of Route 1 would love that, and folks north of 95 will hate that. You never know. It could, and maybe this is not an option at all, really, as we kind of flush these out. And Alex, I see your hand raised. I'll just quick get through these and then open it up to comment after that. Okay. Similar question, would you be interested or consider allowing more than one dwelling unit per lot in a residential zone? There are concerns about this as well. Some examples could be that we've seen in other communities, similar communities, allowing the conversion of historic home into a two-family, a large historic home into a two or three family instead of a one family. Not necessarily, I guess you could envision this as two separate dwelling units on a property. It doesn't necessarily have to look like that. It could be attached, in an internal conversion. And that might be more appropriate in certain areas, maybe in historic areas downtown, to try and preserve these structures as opposed to more rural areas. The second is streamline the permit process for multifamily developments in commercial zones. Ironically, this is
It's in the bill.
the housing bill that creates as of right permitting process for residential developments, middle housing developments in commercial zones. Our current commercial zones, so as of right doesn't mean you just go do it and you don't need permits or a review. As of right is considered a site plan approval by the commission. It's essentially the Planning and Zoning Commission acting administratively. If you meet the regulations, the project shall be approved. So much so that if they fail to act within a certain amount of time, it's an automatic approval. Nothing in our commercial zones currently is as of right except for a single family house. Commission has clearly expressed over the years that they want control over everything. And that can be appropriate in some cases and just really cumbersome in other situations that now applicants are required to have mandatory public hearings. It's an added expense to an applicant. It's an added expense to the town as well for that. So that is something that the commission is absolutely going to have to consider in their new zoning code update. Site plan approvals for certain uses. Creating incentives. This came up in our discussion tonight. Create incentives for building homes in certain areas of town that are reserved for people who are currently spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. Do we want to incentivize certain areas of our town for affordable housing? That is talked about in the housing bill as well. It's not a shall in the housing bill. It's an opportunity. And what does that mean if you opt out of it? It speaks to discretionary funding, discretionary infrastructure funding, things like that. When you're looking to get grants for transit-oriented grants, things like that. Although there is language, I believe, in the bill that says you cannot be, a municipality cannot necessarily be hindered by the fact that they haven't done that in consideration for grants. But we'll get a little bit more information on that in the future. So again, people, we don't know what this looks like. A lot of times zoning terms and tools are complicated and confusing, and we may need to break some of these down into meetings. Clearly, if folks are concerned. And the last one is whether or not to consider building homes on town-owned land in a controlled and limited way. Everybody's talked about it. We have schools closing. We are doing facility studies. We're not going to operate in a bubble. We're going to float the idea out and see what people say. There are no decisions being made currently, but those are things to consider, I think, as well. Not just for the policymakers on the Board of Selectmen side, but also for the zoning commission to look and see if there's an encouragement for that, then the regulation should be drafted in such a way as to not prohibit it. So I'm happy to leave this questionnaire up and provide opportunity for you to give more feedback. I'm not sure how much our little charts are going to change here. I think it gives the commission some good feedback as far as moving forward.
Yep.
People want to be involved and have questions. So maybe you don't know all of these items either. So I think some education over the next few months as we start to look into restructuring and organizing, at least the organizational part of the regulations, we can continue these outreach opportunities to learn more.
That question number 8, I mean, people who have concerned about it probably didn't know exactly what are you talking about, what parcels. I mean, that would be
That's the
very
facilities study
Absolutely.
that's going on too.
And we don't know what parcels.
Yeah.
It's just to, it's hard to ignore the fact that the town, what the town owns and whether or not some of those could be repurposing. When you look at conservation, those are opportunities, right? What do we have? The same thing with allowing more than one unit on a property. That's a great way to conserve open space and not create new development, is to retrofit existing structures. Right, so we're trying to meet both sides here. So we need to talk about all of these, I think, moving forward.
We have a hand raised online, so maybe we could.
Yeah, is it Alex? Let me stop sharing, Alex, so I can see you.
Yeah.
Alex, can you hear us now?
Hi there, good evening. Am I coming in clearly?
Yes, very.
Okay, thank you for hosting this. I am calling from San Francisco. So
Different
and,
housing.
And clearly this is a demonstration of my love for our town. I'm not exactly sure where to begin, but I think all of this comes from an ideology that expensive states are struggling with. The cost of living is really high. Seniors are struggling with big homes. They lack optionality of what they can transition into. Lots of different things are aligning to get us to where we are today. But at the end of the day, we really are talking about development. And no matter how you sugarcoat it, we're talking about building houses and cutting down trees and paving driveways. And we're talking about adding more cars, and more cars lead to more stoplights and more guardrails and wider roads, and more people support things that people want, the different kinds of grocery stores and different kinds of retail options. And it really is, as someone who gets to travel a lot, and for my career, got to travel to every 169 municipality in Connecticut. I've witnessed it over my lifetime. I've witnessed small towns grow and change, and I've seen this type of housing that was shown on the first slide pop up in Glastonbury and Manchester, and every town across Connecticut has something similar being built and are having discussions like this. And to the person who called in earlier, yes, Madison will eventually turn into a continuation of many of the other towns along the shoreline, along the I-95 corridor. And I think the crux of the matter is, do we have the courage to stand up and say, towns like Madison that have green space and have trees and have historic structures, do they have value in their existence? Should they be preserved as they are? Just in one of the earlier slides, 164 units are being built. You know, that slide that showed all the stuff that has yet been to be built is coming to Madison. That's 164 units. We've all witnessed the trees, the American chestnuts that were blight-free, raised and destroyed, and that's just the beginning. So what we have currently is leading to what is in the pipeline. I would argue we should be going other way. We should be tightening regulations. We should be enacting policy to prevent developers from putting a house on every inch of available space. I'm looking at it, beautiful San Francisco. It's absolutely gorgeous. There's 800,000 people here, and there is a massive push for even more housing. And I look at how pretty it is, but it's a big garden. It's not a natural environment. We've lost the ecosystem, the entomology of insects, the litter that's necessary for trees, for insects to live, the migration of birds. I mean, the ecosystem has basically been turned into a man-made ecosystem, and it's what's going to happen to Connecticut. More fertilizer would be put down on lawns, more de-icer. People are going to, put in plants that they find pretty, but the owls and everything else, the natural habitat that we enjoy of New England is not going to be around for much longer. And I would advocate that people stand up and say, yes, sure, we should be smart of how we do things, but call this for what it is. This is absolutely development. Sugarcoat it as you want, but
Did you have
I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate everyone who's volunteering and all the hard work that's been put into it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for those comments. Erin, should we do a quick run through of the bill, which is like 500
Yes, I'll do it
sections,
very quick.
and then maybe put more questions for the hardiest of us.
Okay. So last week, the House approved HB 5002, and 2 days ago, the Senate passed as well. And it is expected that Governor Lamont will sign the bill. It is, as I indicated, it's an expansive bill, roughly 90-something pages. There's a link here, and I will post the link on the town's, on the planning and zoning page. And if anybody individually would like it, I'm happy to send you a copy of it, as well as including the summary from the Office of Legislative Research. And as I said, we're planning a panel discussion on that so that we can more specifically focus on how this impacts our town. Overall, one of the concerns is what you're saying, this fair share housing allocations, and what does that mean for Madison directly, and what is that number? We are still putting that together, what that specific number is, and it's essentially the state asking municipalities to create opportunities for roughly a quarter of your fair share to be built in your municipality.
And we think the fair share is based on the 10% of total units, which Madison has, just over 8,000
Yes, we have roughly
existing
8,000.
units.
Okay,
But
so
we'll get into the math later.
there is language in the bill, I can tell you, I'm sorry, who's sitting next to you?
Janet Nicolini?
Janet. So as Janet had said, there is an opportunity to appeal that number to the state. And so at our panel, we'll kind of work through what that process is and what that looks like in town. As we said, maybe depending on soil types and the area, there may not be an opportunity to create that specific number. And it wouldn't necessarily be the first time in looking at new land use legislation that was created by a politician and not necessarily folks who use the regulations on a daily basis. So there's some digesting that needs to be done here. And again, here we did include the link. The Connecticut Mirror has a decent article and this interactive map on it. This was when the housing bill passed. I'm not sure if she has updated the article yet,
They've
reflecting
updated
the
articles,
Senate.
but I don't know if they've put new maps out.
Yeah, and the Office of Policy and Management, OPM, with the state does have a whole process on how this fair share housing allocation is determined. And it's very complicated to read through that. So we're working through
We
that.
haven't figured it out yet.
Some of the highlights of the regulations, as I mentioned, allow middle housing developments in commercial districts. So that's a requirement to change the regulations for commercial zones to allow by site plan approval middle housing, which is anywhere between 2 and 9 units, duplexes, triples, quads, clusters, those kinds of things, townhouse style units by site plan approval. We currently do not have a regulation that allows them by site plan approval, but we do have regulations that allow multifamily in some areas through special exception. Another one that is a direct impact on our community as well as every community in the state is removal of minimum parking requirements for housing. And so that is going to be interesting, where the regulations were reduced in 2021 and now further reduced. Our regulations, the town did not opt out in 2021. So essentially a studio apartment, a 1-bedroom apartment, we could only require 1 parking space per unit. Anything above that, we could require 2 parking spaces. That now goes away. However, there is language, I think, where the commission will have the opportunity to ask for information from the applicant, some kinds of studies that you can accommodate parking somewhere in the vicinity.
And also public health and safety issues are factors.
Yes, and this is, this is going to be mostly in our transit-oriented areas. That's not realistic in a rural zone to have folks who have to drive to your development to not be able to have any parking. We just don't have on-street parking opportunities like that. So I think developers would likely propose parking spaces around their homes. I think the market will really kind of define this a little further. I think some communities were using parking as an opportunity to prevent housing developments, excessive parking requirements. And this was an opportunity to eliminate that. We may have gone to an extreme though. The discretionary infrastructure funding, this basically is referring to your fair share allocation planning. So if communities are not doing their fair share housing allocation, there is a possibility that you may not receive discretionary funding for projects. So that's grants. The transit-oriented development, the state does define transit-oriented development for residential, commercial, other developments within 1/2 mile or walking distance of our railroad station. So that's something that we need to map out. We need to show you what that particular area is and what properties are affected by that.
And bus stops, Erin, I think as long as it's like every hour, the bus stops.
We do not have bus rapid transit. So ours is simply going to be Metro North. Shoreline,
Shoreline
sorry.
Yeah.
In hopes of eventually getting to Metro North if they ever increase our services. And so the planning, there's language in the bill specifically that tells municipalities how they have to have not just an affordable housing plan now, but they need to have this high priority housing plan in addition to that. So that's if we, as we get into setting aside this fair share housing. So I'm going to break that out for our session and see what we need to do. There are deadlines though. They're not, this isn't all at once. Some of these are in the next couple of years, the deadlines to create these types of plans, similar to when the statutes required municipalities in 22 to create affordable housing plans. That's the reason most municipalities have them. It was a state mandated project. And there were some Department of Housing requirements for middle housing as well. And so there are other requirements in here as well, fair rent commissions, things like that, that now affect our community. They're not necessarily zoning requirements, but they are affecting our community. So we're going to, this bill discussion is going to be not just the zoning piece, but it's going to be the townwide. So all the folks who are affected by this will be invited as well. And I think that's it as far as, and then
That
we
was a
can get
quick
into our.
summary of the bill and 2 pages on a PowerPoint.
Yeah, I mean, right now, the two direct are the as of right housing and the parking requirements. Those we definitely have to digest for this. The rest of the fair share, that will come and unfold over the next few months. We'll get a better picture of what that's going to look like for us. And then we'll piggyback on that for the regulations, right?
Thank you.
The last thing I wanted to say, in our affordable housing plan, we did, at the time I did, an analysis of what all of our current housing regulations are and what opportunities they provided. And so some of that information will be used by the commission, but that's out there now to give you a clear picture of what we currently have as regulations. And then we'll go through how often are these used? Are they useful regulations? I can tell you that our affordable housing regulations and our housing opportunity district regulations, when developers are coming in to develop affordable housing, they're using the housing appeals process and not our regulations because it is a streamlined process. So you look at what types of development you're trying to encourage in the community and how to encourage that. Streamlining the permit process is one of them. The state is here on one side, streamlining a process for affordable developments and multifamily. Perhaps the town needs to look at other opportunities to streamline where our regulations are failing and where we can improve them to encourage the types of development you're looking for. I think development is a fact in our regulations. You have to create rules and focused areas of where that would be allowed. That's part of this zoning regulation update.
Thanks, Erin. So a quick summary just there of the next steps, which we've already talked about a little bit, but hire a consultant, continue to review and understand the implications for Madison related to the HB 5002. Create the online housing resource page, which would be great. So it's an easy way to find all the information and resources that we're making available. Host topic specific workshops. Erin, you mentioned the topic of septic. I think there'll be other topics as well that will come up as we keep moving forward. And then again, identifying developable land in Madison, which will be a factor when we're considering all the fair housing requirements now that we're being asked to do, and why we might appeal. Because if we just don't have the land or the resources or the infrastructure or the soil or any, all these different factors that go into where can you build in Madison? Which are really important. And I think from the feedback we're getting, we may have other topics to cover as well. So thanks for that. And if we have more questions.
Yeah, many of us have heard about these large corporations coming in and buying up rental properties. So let's say Madison does meet a goal, whatever that is, Madison's goal, the state's goal, and has a certain number of rental properties. What's to prevent then a corporation to come in and buy that from the initial developer, such that we don't then go back to square one, where now they've raised the rental on that, we no longer have affordable housing in that
Hmm.
section. So is there a way to prevent that? I mean, how do you say you can't sell that to a corporation? And then Madison no longer meets the state's requirements or our own town goals.
So affordable housing is deed restricted. It runs with the land. It doesn't run with the owner of the property. And as is all land use approvals by the commission. So if a permit is issued for a specific development with deed restricted units, affordable units, that runs with the land unless somebody came back to the commission to try to modify an application or change that. So a subsequent buyer would be bound by the same affordability plan as the original developer, such as the case on the corner of Mill and Cottage that has changed hands.
For whatever units are not under that deed restriction, then those could be sold, or that property could be sold to a corporation that could then increase the rental, and we're looking at an even worse situation. I mean, I don't know how you would be able to prevent it, but
Well, the
I
current
mean-
owner could increase the rent, right?
current owner
You don't
can't,
have to sell it to the.
sure. But, I mean,
I think in other-
corporations have a lot.
Other
of-
communities, you're right, there are
Yeah.
corporations buying up a lot of properties,
In Madison?
not in Madison.
No, I've got a nephew that has to keep moving because this is happening wherever he goes. Huge corporations are buying up all these rental properties and raising the rates and just can't live there anymore. Happening all over Denver area.
Look at the statute now, the requirement for a fair rent commission. And so as we get into understanding, I am not a master of anything fair rent commission related, but I guess we'll be learning. Heather may know more than all of us in this room.
Not an expert.
Oh.
by any means, no.
But that might be, some of that as far as exorbitant raising of rents. I'm sure that falls under,
That, and I think that's
Their
for
realm.
municipalities that are over 15,000 population, so we
Yes.
will have to
yes,
comply.
now we're triggered in that. The last update, we still fell below the threshold of needing a fair rent commission,
So
but now it is a
3,000 people would
requirement.
leave town, we could
We'd be all set.
avoid it.
All you have to do is restrict the development.
Well, one reason I want to say, and it's in response to a couple of comments that have been made tonight, is on the regional level, we've been talking about how important it is to treat developers with more respect. And they're not, not demonize them and not, they're not the evil enemy. They're people we want to be working with. And this is fair to say, just a little bit, to say, it's important to hear from the developers as well of what works and what doesn't work. And
That is a conversation absolutely on the regional level of hearing. I think that's useful in determining where you're zoning things, focusing a multifamily type development, single family development, understanding what developers are looking for. If it is the desire to develop a certain area and encourage affordable housing there, and then the commission goes ahead and rezones that area and thinks, yes, we're ready. And then you hear from developers and they say, that's ridiculous.
we'd never do that.
We could never develop that for what you had envisioned. So it's interesting to hear from them, from their perspectives, and they're partnering with municipalities to create the housing that they want. Whether it's a senior housing, first floor living, things like that, they're creating these partnerships to try to steer the housing that they need to meet their residents' needs.
Any other questions or comments? Is everybody feeling kind of numb? There's a lot to cover. Erin, thank you so much for all of your insights. It is impressive. And we're incredibly lucky to be working with everybody in town and to have the staff and dedicated volunteers that make up our commissions and committees. We really appreciate working with everybody.
Madam Chair, Alex Province has his hand raised quick before you sign off, if you'd like.
Alex?
Did you allow him to talk?
No.
I will. There he goes. Alex?
Can you hear me now? Okay. Since you asked, Madam Chair, if anyone had any more questions, I'll blame you for my comment. Something that was not discussed tonight that I think is germane to the conversation is 40% of Madison is over 55. And as you've mentioned in the designing the POCD, Madison skews as an affluent England town towards more seniors. And as a baby boomers peak in 2035, there's going to be approximately 2,500 houses out of the 6,000 plus put back onto the market. I think it's something that I'm surprised hasn't been talked about, but seniors struggling today are not likely to be benefiting from policy changes that are years out. And my comment is because simply we're not going to be able to pass this stuff, build it, get it approved, and then someone in their 80s is probably not likely to, it's probably moving on to continued care and not into an affordable housing unit. And that's just the reality of the situation that Madison finds itself in. So I think we also need to look at this with the lens of what is Madison look like as a demographic in 10 years? And seniors that are struggling to find housing today that are stuck with big houses, these changes are not likely to affect them. And my generation, Generation X, that follows the baby boomers, are much smaller than this bubble that's predicted to peak, in less than 10 years. I'd like this just added to the conversation since no one else brought it up. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. We didn't mention it tonight, but it is definitely part of the conversation. And it's in the plan of conservation and development too.
I'm just gonna say.
We address it. We address it.
Addressing that PhD.
Okay, great. Well, unless there are any further questions or comments. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
All in favor?
Thank you all.